All right, there we go. How's everybody doing? Let's bring it in if you could. We even gave you bonus time, and you're still going. That's amazing to me. Although I can see a few of you, you're sort of stealthy, right? You're like, yeah, 5 minutes, 30 seconds is good for me. So you sort of sit down, and I know how it goes. We're so glad that you're here. This is week 2 of our Explore God series. And if you were here last week, Explore God is a very cool thing because it's a combined series of about 25 different churches throughout much of Nassau County and into Suffolk and Queens. And as far as we know, we've never seen 25 churches come together like this before to really cooperate and talk about the same things and the same topics and kind of join our efforts together in terms of preparation. And it's a very cool thing. And so we're excited to be partnering with churches all over Long Island today as part of this Explore God series. This is our second week. Last week on the first week, we kind of asked the question, does life have a purpose? And so if you weren't here last week, you want to check that out on our website because we talked about how, each of us, it's kind of the way we're wired to pursue self-interest. But pursuing self-interest isn't necessarily as kind of bad as it sounds because pursuing self-interest really means you're dedicated to your own happiness. But if you're truly dedicated to your own happiness, then we learned last week that the purpose of man, chief end of man, is to glorify God by enjoying him forever. So as we learn to enjoy God, as we learn to kind of reflect him into the community that we're placed in, then we learn to become more and more like him, and that's our purpose. So it's a very cool thing. Now this week, we're kind of moving to the next question. Does God exist? So we'll talk today about the existence of God. Now in some ways, it can strike you as a weird topic to talk about in church, right? Like, does God exist? Well, we're here. So we already know this. So you can take it a few ways. You can take it as like that class in college that you had to take, but you already knew all about it. Like maybe it was like a foreign language class in your native language or something. Like it can be a day like that for you. Like it's just easy. I already know. But here's the thing. Studies are pretty universal that about a third of all people remain thoroughly unconvinced about the existence of God. And Beacon is not actually a normal church. I hope you know this. Okay, we have people here every single week, and we love this. We have people on the whole kind of journey of faith. There's a huge spectrum of people who are here. So even though there's probably several of us who don't want to admit it, this is a real, definite question that we're grappling with. Second, even if you are convinced about God, we all go through seasons of doubt. If you want to know what seasons of doubt feel like, talk to any Jet fan. They will tell you what seasons of doubt feel like. They've been doing it for 40 years, seasons of doubt. Okay, so they know all about doubt. They know all about bad seasons. So we all have these seasons where we feel like Nick fans or we feel like even Giant fans sometimes, right? We have these seasons of doubt. And so it's really nice for us to be reminded about the truth of who God is and how he exists in this world. Furthermore, I think many of us have this same conversation when we go to parties or when we have people over or whatever. They say, oh, you believe in God? I don't even believe he exists. And we all kind of freeze. Like, oh, I don't know what to say. So I want to help you a little bit with that. You can grab a couple of things to take with you, put in your pocket, so the next time somebody says, you're doing the whole church thing, the whole God thing, that's all pretend, right? You can bring a little something to that conversation if you want to. Now, part of the perception of that is people believe that mankind as a race, as a species, has sort of outgrown the need for God. So if you look at kind of the history of man, we're going to look at the whole history of man in about 4 minutes. There's really been 3 dominant worldviews, 3 different ways that people have looked at God. The first one is kind of an ancient and medieval worldview that lasted from the beginning of recorded history. This is throughout all the Old Testament. It would include the time of Jesus, would last well into the New Testament. This kind of ancient medieval worldview, of course, there were nuances throughout, but the predominant thought during this era was that our world and our lives were eminently spiritual. That there was a deep, significant spiritual component to life. So if you stitch that together with anything you've ever learned about Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Mayan civilizations, what do they always have? Lots of gods, right? Gods for all kinds of stuff. It's because they believed that life was so spiritual. They believed that everything they saw had a spiritual element. We studied the book of Jonah last summer. We saw as soon as there was a big storm, what did the sailors do? They prayed to a whole bunch of gods because they knew, hey, if there's a big storm, there must be a spiritual component to this. So mankind for thousands and thousands of years was convinced of the spiritual realm that existed. Furthermore, the way that they kind of interacted with truth was always dictated to them. So truth was set, it was communicated. You could think of it as the truth is what I was told. So you would take that truth, this is 10 commandments on down the line. You've been told the truth, you believe the truth. I have a cold. I'm sorry, it's going to happen. Now, moving forward from there, we had kind of this modernist worldview, which is when the world totally changed. One of the landmarks you could think of would be the printing press, for example. So all of a sudden, knowledge began to spread. People used to have their own access to research, to the scriptures, to literature. There was whole explosions in the arts and the way that music was presented and prepared and taught. And everything sort of changed. And in this modernist worldview, things started to shift. It was no longer the truth is what I've been told. It now became, this is Enlightenment and coming on, Renaissance, all of that. The truth is what can be studied and verified. And this became kind of the dominant theme. So when people took that into spirituality, they said, well, I'm not as convinced anymore about God because he can't be studied, he can't be verified. And so throughout kind of this modern period, this chain reaction started to happen. Maybe the dominant theme about God to start would have been something called theism, which is God exists and he's involved in our lives. Then it would have been whittled down to sort of deism. God exists, but he's distant. He sort of started up the world and walked away. That's actually around the time of the founding of America, deism. Then if you kept moving, eventually you would reach naturalism, which would be the only things that are real are those that can be experienced, explained, studied, and verified. And so the worship of God, the understanding of God started to be filtered through this modernist viewpoint. And so that's why, by the late 1800s, Dostoevsky would say, if God is dead, everything is permissible. His, of course, was an if, because he didn't believe that, but he was just explaining where naturalism had ended. So the modern viewpoint was God is on very, very shaky ground because he can't be studied, he can't be verified. But now we're starting to move into a postmodern worldview, which is totally different again. The postmodern worldview is much more personal, it's much more individual, and studies are showing a rise in the interest in spiritual things. Now, that doesn't mean people are just automatically going back to the one and true God, but they're starting to understand more of this spiritual element. One study that I read this week out of many was from the Pew Forum. They said that 37% of people who are not interested in church, so that's already a narrowed field, 37% of them still believe in the spiritual, still believe in a higher authority. So there's this growing sense, and there's so much more data here, but it's clear that in postmodern world, a sense of the individual, a sense of our own spiritualism is growing. And we're seeing this across other parts of culture. So don't think this is just kind of theoretical or isn't touching your life in any way, because it is. The shift from modernist to postmodernist viewpoint is across our entire culture. One example that I'll give you, education. How many of you are educators or you have kids in school? How many of you have been talking about the Common Core? You're groaning. Modernist education was, here are the facts. Learn the facts, memorize the facts. Learn the standard set of operations necessary to repeat in order to achieve the known and established facts. Common Core is a postmodernist view on education. Common Core is there are many paths to the answer. Common Core is you have to be able to explain how you got from here to there. And you know what? If you have a good explanation for your answer, we might take it as the answer. Because it's about the individual journey and it's about kind of the process and about your path. So anytime you talk about an experience or a path or a journey, that's a postmodernist viewpoint. And we're seeing this across culture. That's why even here at our church, when we talk about when people are coming to faith, one day we'll talk about kind of the moment that a person receives salvation because they've made a decision. Modernist. Next second, we'll talk about the journey that we've each gone across in our spiritual journey towards God. Postmodernist. Why are we mixing them? Because that's where we live. We have this incredible, cool opportunity that we are existing in the blurred line between modernism and postmodernism. Almost no generations in the history of this world have had this experience, but we get to. We live in totally shifting times, which is a very cool thing, although you can get a little bit unsteady on your feet, right? Because everything's kind of moving and shifting. But don't worry, because God sits above all of that. So in all of these eras, there were great things about how they revealed God, and there were weak things about how they revealed God. And so what we're going to try to do today in the time that we have is talk about the existence of God and try to hit modernist viewpoint, which a whole bunch of you I think will connect with, and hit postmodernist viewpoint, which I think a whole bunch of you will connect with. Does that make sense? All right, so on all of this, as we're kind of moving through it quickly, on almost any particular paragraph or section that gets your attention and you would like more information, email me and I'll send you a bunch of stuff, because this is such a quick overview. We could do a whole series on just this topic, but I want to do it just in like 20 more minutes so that we can get kind of a focused look at this. So when we say God is real, that God exists, what do we actually mean by that? God is not a person. He doesn't have a body like we do. He's not here in that sense. He's not sort of sitting in the back. By the way, God would never sit in the back. But he didn't like sort of wander in today, and we don't have to wonder if he's here. God doesn't exist that way in the universe. You can think of it as he's neither bound nor described by the physical laws of the universe. Present equally and fully in all of the universe, yet distinct from it, and Lord over it. There's no place where God is absent. There's no place that's separate from his power. There's no place where he is spread thin. There's no place where he is concentrated. God is equally over all of this universe. Now, it's really existential and we can't fully understand it, which is why we keep talking about this. But one analogy would be to maybe think about our own bodies, because we're created in the image of God. So we have this spiritual component in addition to our own physical component. So, of course, you know exactly where your arm is. You know exactly where your leg is. By the way, I love that phase in babies when they're figuring that out. Like a baby will be waving one day and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, I've never seen this before, right? All the parents have seen this. It's amazing because, of course, we're totally self-aware of that part of our body. But where in you is your emotional core? Where is your soul? Where is your spirit? Because when you feel emotional, you get responses all in different parts of your body, right? If you're scared, your knees might knock. Does that mean your fear is in your knees? Right? If you're anxious, you might have goosebumps on all of your skin. It doesn't mean that you feel anxiety in your skin. If you're angry, you might feel heat in your face. Does that mean there's anger in your face? Of course not. If you were to dissect yourself, not recommended. If you were to dissect yourself, you would never find your spiritual sense. You would never find your emotions. Dallas Willard, as a scholar, he said it this way: you cannot find me or any of my thoughts, feelings, or character traits in any part of my body. Even I cannot. If you wish to find me, the last thing you should do is open my body and take a look. We know this. God exists in much the same way in the universe. He's in it, through it, he's over it, but he is unseen. It's very clear to us that he exists and he's present in that way. So as we look more towards kind of the modernist mindset, I want to take a minute. The Explore God site that supports this series has a whole bunch of articles and videos on all of these topics. So I want to just kick this off by looking at this video about some of the unanswered questions from really the modernist mindset.
There's a whole bunch of natural phenomenon that religious people used to just attribute to God. Thunder is the sky god getting angry or whatever. And now we have scientific explanations for this. We know exactly how thunder works. We know how lightning works. We know how clouds form. We know, to choose a biblical example, why there's a rainbow. It's because of the prism effect, right, of moisture in the atmosphere. And so it can feel like there's no need for God anymore because we've got scientific explanations for all this. However, there's a whole bunch of questions science has opened up that actually didn't exist in pre-modern times or pre-scientific times that are even harder to answer than why is there thunder or why is there a rainbow? And that's a question like, for example, why does the universe have a beginning? Because for a long time, in the kind of early modern era, people just assumed it was steady state. The universe had always been there. So there was no need for a creator because you didn't have a beginning. And then you get the prediction of the Big Bang, that there actually was a beginning, and then you get experimental confirmation of the Big Bang through the background radiation and so forth. And you realize now we have to explain why there's something rather than nothing. And that is not there is no scientific answer to that. There's a scientific answer to why is the sky blue or why is there thunder, but you can't form a scientific question about why there's something rather than nothing. Science can't get there. Another one is consciousness. Human beings are aware of ourselves, and other creatures even seem to have a little bit of this, awareness. And we're in the world asking questions of the meaning of the world. And we do things like mathematics, right? We start doing math, and we find out that the math that somebody cooked up on a blackboard or in a notebook somewhere connects to the way the universe actually works. Why in the world does math work? Why do we have the kinds of brains that can come up with math that actually describes the universe? That is not a scientific question, but it's a question that we only have now because we see how well math works for explaining the world. So in that sense, I think there are some questions that have been answered and that we don't need religion to sort of answer at a physical level. But then there are other questions raised by science that now there's no way to answer them as scientists. We have to have a philosophical or a theological answer to them. And so in a way, it's just the questions that have changed, and in many ways it's gotten harder not to believe that there's some kind of rationality, some kind of purpose, some kind of consciousness cosmically that corresponds to what we see around us in human beings and in the world that we've been given.
In this genre of talking about the modernist viewpoint, there's a strong, probably half a dozen arguments that are very, very convincing. And I just want to go through two of them. First one would be what they call the argument from cause, which he alluded to just a little bit. The argument from cause is the basic argument. It really comes from Aristotle, by the way, ancient and medieval thinker, who says that the existence of any item makes it clear that there was an inventor or a source behind it. See, for everything that moves or operates or functions or is caused to move or operate or function has had that acted on it by something else before it. Okay? Even a law of inertia. If something is at rest, it will stay at rest unless acted upon by some outside force. So in order for something to exist, in order for something to be here and present, it was caused by something. So as you start to study that chain reaction, everything moves back and it's caused by something else that sits behind it, caused by something else that sits behind it. And eventually, you will reach a point that it's unexplainable what the cause was. Not that we're not trying. The Large Hadron Collider, I think, is the coolest thing on Earth, maybe literally. It's in France. Okay, it's a 17-mile long machine, and it's in a loop. And what it allows scientists to do is to take particles and get them up to 99.99+% the speed of light. So they're moving pretty good, all right? So you have a 17-mile loop that they're making 10,000 RPMs, all right? There's a lot of heat there. There's a lot of brains there, because I don't even understand how you could do that. But they do this. So they get these particles moving till they eventually bash them into each other. They're trying to create a bang. They're trying to create a small bang. Because if they can create small bang, then they can start to understand big bang. Okay? They've been doing this since 2008. It's actually shut down again right now because they want to make it faster. All right? There's some real men working on this. It's got to be faster, right? So they take this thing offline, they make it faster, and they've actually understood all sorts of cool things. They break the particles apart. They find new subparticles that they didn't know existed. If you read about it and you understand what they have discovered, explain it to me, because I know that it's amazing. But I can tell you, every time they discover something, there's a new round of questions. Because they go, that's pretty cool. Where did that come from? And down and down and down the line we go until eventually you have to understand that there's no hypothesis or there's no other construct you can build for the beginning of the universe starting except for a creator. Stephen Hawking, smartest dude on earth, said this: the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang, they're enormous. I think there are clearly religious implications when you start to discuss the origins of the universe. If it exists, someone made it. Okay, that's your argument from cause. Psalm says it this way, Psalm 36. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light, we see light. This word fountain is makor. It's a Hebrew word. It talks about kind of a life's source, even blood. In other places, the exact same word is used for the blood of childbirth. It's the beginning, the source where it all starts. Now, beyond that, we can talk about an argument from design. The latent complexity that exists in the world, at that point, starts to really demand an intelligent designer. This would be a very simple concept. There's so many illustrations. Just think of one. Imagine you had the Costco-sized coffee can, all right? We use like 27 every Sunday, like this. And you just threw into it a bunch of gears, wires, and a battery, and some glass. And you shook it. If you do not believe in an argument for design, that means that your belief would be that eventually you would shake this thing and stop and open it. There'd be a Rolex inside that's working and operating. That's what you'd be saying. That you'd be saying that in a theoretical way, with an infinite number of opportunities to shake it and stop, eventually there would be a Rolex inside. I would encourage you to try it. I will buy it from you at full price if it works, because that's the argument from design. So you can take whatever discipline kind of lights you up and that you think is cool, and just think it through for a minute. You know, if you sell glasses, explain to me the parts of the eyeball and how they work with its rods and its cones and its colors. It's fascinating to me. You're an orthopedist. Explain to me how a bone can break. A friend of mine broke his collarbone recently. And they said, oh no, the ends will find each other. Just sit still. Really? The bones find each other? That doesn't make any sense to me. You know, every OBGYN, the stuff that they see, that's clearly, there's an incredible complexity that's there. So when you talk about that type of complexity of design, there's clearly an argument there. They call it the teleological argument, that there is a designer behind it. Tim Keller said it this way: for organic life to exist, the fundamental regularities and constants of physics, the speed of light, the gravitational constant, the corresponding strength of weak and strong nuclear forces, all of these must have values that fall within a very narrow range. The probabilities that this perfect calibration happened by chance is so tiny as to be statistically negligible. The acceptance of the existence of God as the creator is the only key that can tie together this construct of understanding the complexity of design, the narrowness of the acceptable values, to understand that God must exist. Romans says it this way: for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. I love the throw in there. You know, the complexity of what's been made, so you have no excuse. That's what Paul said. From what has been made, it's clear. But that's all modernist. That's taking the tool of modernism and saying, you're arguing against God on the facts, I'm arguing for God on the facts. And of course, God holds up very well against modernism because he sits above it. But let's look now into kind of the post-modernist mindset. So check this one out.
I have friends that say, Earl, I don't believe. I just don't believe. And I ask, my question is, you know, what don't you believe? Because you might not believe some things that I might not believe as well. I have, you know, one buddy of mine, he believes that there's something out there. There's something. He doesn't know what, and I'm okay with that. can I with 1,000% assurity tell an individual this is the way it is? The data that I'm bringing to the table, if you will, is not necessarily 1 + 1 = 2. I have had the beautiful privilege and honor to experience love. And I get it in my wife, I definitely get it from my kids. And when you experience love, when you even see a child come into the world. I remember when my first son was born, when that little guy came out and he looked like he was 85 years old, and it looked like he had crazy amounts of hair even on his forehead, and he wasn't terribly cute, in all honesty, from the first time he came out. He has since grown into a beautiful young man. But when I saw him, I mean, explain it. Explain the connection, explain the love, explain the awe. And what I'm experiencing there in that moment when my son is born and my wife has just been a trooper and carried this little guy for these 9 months, and I've seen her belly grow, and now he comes into this world and all of that, and we're crying, and there's tears of joy and laughter and so much hope and life in that moment. God is love. It just points me back to him. And any friends of mine that have experienced love, they've experienced that presence, that joy, that hope. I think it's all just a little sign, just telling us that there's something more here. There's something more to life. There's something more. And then it's up to all of us to try to figure out, okay, what is the more? Where is the more? Who is the more? And for me, that put me on a path of scripture, of Jesus being, not just a good teacher, but a man that says he wants my heart and my life surrendered to him, and is calling me by his love and his grace to follow in his path.
If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. The yearnings and the longings that are in you, that are in me, they've been placed there by God because of our desire to be in relationship with him, our desire to grow into his image. And so when we're in this world and there are things that you experience, the inner sense of morality or justice that you carry, why does it feel so wrong when you know that a child has been sold into slavery? If the world was random and chance and God didn't exist, it actually wouldn't matter. I know that's cold, but it's true. If the only goal is that mankind continues to exist, it wouldn't matter if we lost some. Wouldn't matter. Why is that so wrong? Why does that make me so angry inside? Why is it when I experience beauty in this world, whether it's beauty experienced in nature, you have a chance to go on a hike in the morning and the sun is just rising over the hills and you can hear the sounds of the woods coming alive and you can smell the life that is around you. Why does that fill me with both joy and longing? Why does it make me sad? Because I know I'm enjoying the sunrise right now, but it's almost over. And then I have to go about the rest of my day. What is that draw for beauty that I have in me? Where does that come from? Because if life was random, if God didn't exist, beauty wouldn't matter. There would be no reason to preserve any part of this world because it was beautiful. There'd be no point. Instead, we would just consume every resource we could find because we want to just empower ourselves to live on. Why is it we crave relationship? Why is it that we look to each other and we band together and we're drawn into the circle of friendship, of romantic love? Every relationship that you will ever experience in this world is going to end, I promise. Every single one. Right? I mean, everyone's going to die anyway. If life was random, then the relationships wouldn't matter. You would just network with people who could propel you in the direction that you personally wanted to go, and then when you were done, you would leave them behind. But you would never do that. Why? Because the relationship that exists between you is part of that need created by God that pulls you into his presence. And those needs that are in you, that are in me, are proof of God's existence. Because the fact that you have those needs, those wants, those desires, those yearnings, those drives, those passions, they come from him. Because as we learn to walk in those things, we are walking towards Christ. And so I would encourage you, every time you feel those yearnings and those longings, to realize that they're echoes of this other world. And so when you desire pleasure, when you desire beauty, when you desire justice, when you know something is right, when you know something is wrong, when you're drawn into relationship with anyone who surrounds you, know that that is part of God's person that is in you. And you've been created in his image so that you can be drawn back into relationship with him. Ancient thinker Blaise Pascal, he said it differently. What else does this craving and this helplessness proclaim but that there was once in man a true happiness of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace? This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there, the help he cannot find in those that are, though none can help. Since this infinite abyss can only be filled with an infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself. So when you feel those passions in who you are, know that that's God drawing you to himself. And that as you begin to delight in him, as he begins to shape the desires of your heart, and then he begins to fill you with that, know that we then carry the responsibility to walk that love, that justice, that morality, that beauty, that relationship to everyone who surrounds us. Because we will then demonstrate to them the existence of God by the way that we demonstrate ourselves to them. And it's not easy. Being someone else's mirror so that they can see the image of God, that is a frightening thing because it demands incredible dedication, incredible accountability. But it's the greatest privilege that we can be offered on this earth, to be pointing people towards God's existence. Because once you know that he exists, the only logic that follows is to understand that not only does he exist, but he's intimately involved in your life. That he's drawing you into that relationship with him, and he desperately desires for you to be close to him and to demonstrate his love to those who surround you. So will you pray with me to this end? God, we pray to you this morning because for so many of us, part of our confidence of the existence of you is the experience of the relationship. That we've heard your voice. We've heard you speak through your word. We know that you've revealed to us those things which are in us. And so, God, I pray that each of us this morning would have that humbleness and that openness to evaluate ourselves, to be aware of your presence in our lives, to look to you for all wisdom, authority, and direction. God, allow us to, as we grow in you, reflect you well. Allow us to be people that are known for our love and are known for our community, known for our justice, because we're reflecting you to them. So we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.